war. I don't know about you, but I can really resonate with this feeling, like my life is a pendulum swinging, that there is the mundane, and then there is the momentous. There is the ho-hum, and then the oh my goodness. There is the it's normal, it's what is happening, back and forth in my life. And sometimes the momentous is almost like, boom, it's so big. And trying to even recover the mundane, I get thrown off. Feel like I see nods. Okay, so I want to invite us to think about Jesus in the midst of that. And what does it mean to follow Jesus in a life in which we frequently feel like we're ping-ponging between things we don't want to do, things we don't want to have happen. When we're ping-ponging between it's so relentlessly uninteresting and then it's so constantly harassingly big. We're living in this kind of perpetual roller coaster. How do we experience Jesus in the midst of that? We have this little nugget of a story from the Gospel of Mark that has really been speaking to me this week about that issue, about how we walk through this life in the midst of that time. And the metaphor that has been coming to me is drumming. And so I'm going to invite you to think about that with me as we go forward with it. First off, you know how they say you march to a different drummer, or there's this drum beat of life? If you're in big cities like New York, I was just in Chicago, people sort of walk at a certain pace. It's almost like a cultural rhythm of that place. And I don't know what it's like everywhere, but it certainly seems like if you go to New York and then you come to St. Louis, people walk at a different pace. There's a different inner drum beat that's going on. I don't know what Bethsaida was like, this little town that Jesus walked into, but I can guarantee you they had a drum beat. They had a life rhythm that they all lived in together. And that rhythm was sort of how they established their culture and their natural interactions with each other, the pace at which they bartered over the fish that they had just caught in the Sea of Galilee. They had a rhythm. And one of their rhythms was, when we see the guy who's begging, who cannot see, we're going to make sure that we're going to do the best we can by him. So we're going to make sure he's got fish for the day, or we're going to make sure whatever he needs, it's a part of our community, because he is a part of our community. We knew his dad, we knew his mom, we knew his grandparents. He's a part of us. So there's a rhythm. And Jesus comes into that community, and they bring him to Jesus and ask Jesus to heal him. He didn't ask. You notice that? He didn't ask. But he gets brought because it's a part of the system of the community to bring him there. I'm sure he wanted to be healed, but it's not in the story that he asked. And Jesus does something very interesting. Jesus takes him out of the village. You know, there's a lot of miracles. There's miracles where somebody just grabs his hem and she's healed. There are times when Jesus spends very little time with somebody and the healing happens. But here we have a story where the man gets taken out of the village. Isn't that interesting? The rhythms of that culture, the pace of his life, he's pulled out of it. He's invited away from the village. And then Jesus interacts with him in this really unusual way. He spits on his eyes, or maybe spits on his hand and puts his spit on his eyes, and he touches him. It's almost like he turns this guy into a different kind of drum, okay? He turns this guy toward a different kind of rhythm. I say this because Scott and I were talking about this spitting thing, and I was thinking about different cultures around spit. Like, spit's creepy. So why would he, put his spit on this guy's eye. And we were in Kenya, and one of our kids was doing drum lessons with this professional drummer in Kenya. And so Scott said, could you make us some drums? And Bwana Kaboge said, of course I will make you some drums. So he made us 3 drums, a mama, a daddy, and a baby drum, bigger to smaller. And it was beautiful. They were not attractive, they were real drums, right? They weren't like, they didn't say Kenya on them. So when they were finished, he brought them to Scott and our son, and he said, here they are, and the money was exchanged, but he said, no, you can't take them yet. I have to bless them. So he's like, who's got water? He gets water in his mouth, and then the drums are there, and he spits on them. His life force, his energy, his spirit goes on the drums. And now we have those drums. It's great. It mattered. That mattered. We remember that so well. This power that was given out of his very soul, out of his mouth with his spit, onto the drums. What was Jesus doing spitting? I would venture to say there's something like that. Life force, something that man needed to know that something from within Jesus was coming to him. Because then the hands are laid on him. The rhythm of Jesus is given to him, and it's different. It's different from the rhythm in the city. It's different from whatever had been happening in his life. And he's invited to hold it and to be a part of it. Whew, friends, we got a lot of rhythms just drumming in our ears. We have a relentless level of knowledge, of information, of messaging just pouring over us. And we have a relentless level of challenge. Too many big things, too many hard things. Most of us are a little bit overwhelmed on a regular basis. Yes? Jesus invites us to leave the village, to leave the whole cacophony that is perpetually invading our brains, and says, come be present to me. Jesus was present to this guy. Jesus wants to be present to us. It is not God's fault that we are not laying hold of peace and love and joy. It is us. We're the ones. I'm the one opening my New York Times app the minute I wake up in the morning. Me, not God. I'm the one that forgets that the healing and hope and eternal joy that I belong to is right there available to me. I just need to leave the village. I need to take the time to be present, because if I don't, whose fault is it? Mine? Yours? It is as if we have learned to eat Fruit Loops for breakfast every morning and think we're getting nourishment, when over in the other room there is a full course meal of joy and love and peace and relationship that will lift us up out of this relentlessness and help us come back into it more whole, more capable, more at peace, because we know this is not the whole story. All this stuff, all this whirlwind, does not have the final word on our future or our lives or our hope. Jesus said, don't even go into the village. I think that's so interesting that he tells this man who has been transformed, who could change everything. I mean, people will be freaking out, and eventually, obviously, he goes back to the village. But for a minute, just sit there. Just let that inner sense be a part of who you are before you go back in. Let the transformation happen. You notice it took 2 times. Because, yes, his eyes were opened, but he needed more time to really have the clarity, to really see. And boy, howdy, if I'm not the one who's doing a little dip in Jesus, get my little Jesus, even if it's just a little wafer, and then off I go right back into the village, right? Have I really waited to get that perspective, to be like, okay, I got Jesus from the top of my head to the bottom of my toes. Like I'm feeling the presence of the universe, of hope, of my higher power. Whatever name you use to feel that sense, have you let it fill you? Don't nibble. Eat the whole meal. Take it in, because Jesus is ready for us. My goodness, isn't God gracious to be ready and waiting the minute we turn toward him, the minute we turn toward them. God is ready for us. So we had this drum circle. We used to do this with those drums that Buana Kaboge made. We had a few others. And before we moved to our new home, we had a little pond. It was an agricultural trough about 6 feet across, and we buried it. And toads were like, this is the game. They moved in and had their eggs, and every spring we had like toad orgies going on in our pond. And then we'd have the little eggs, and then they'd just be croaking. You know, those toads before the eggs, before they left, it was like croaking, croaking, croaking. It was great. So one night we went out there, and usually we go out, they get quiet, right? But we went out there, and we're sitting nearby, and we have our drums, and we start playing the drums. And pretty soon, the toads start croaking in rhythm with our drums. I kid you not. I looked on YouTube to see if I could show you an example, but we were the only ones, apparently, and we didn't record it. I'm sure others have had this experience. But the wonder of that, of being out and away from the momentous and the mundane in our own backyard, present to the way in which God meets us in those places, in simple wonder in the universe. If you go home and you go on YouTube, I did find this. Crickets. Crickets, if you slow down their voices, sound like a choir. The slowness of that, some people have seen that. Like, it's all around us, y'all. We just don't take time to see it. Or some do, so much more than I do. But we are invited to more and more be away from the village. My invitation for you is to really look at where are you getting swamped by the life that you're living, and where can you put a bit of a hold and get away from it and come towards the places where you have your spiritual nurture. We need that. More than ever, we need that. And let us be in community where also we can make space for each other and hear the beauty of our voices croaking at one another in the drumbeat of God, knowing